Welcome, folks, to the 69th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I'm your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I love airplanes. For 24 and a half years, I flew KC-135s all over the world and helped stand up the only graduate KC-135 course in the world, the KC-135 Weapons School, now the 509th Weapons School. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events? Our purpose from hearing these stories and the lessons learned is to know how does the aviation world really work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And some of the stories that you are going to hear are being told for the very first time on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. This podcast is supported by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all 4 formats on Amazon, hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. The softback version has all the pictures in black and white. If you download the Kindle and the Audible version, there's an extra file that has all of the pictures, 32 of them in color, from the events that are talked about in the book. And folks, I'm excited to tell you, Tanker Pilot Lessons from the Cockpit is now on General Mike Minihan, the commander of Air Mobility Command, his leadership library reading list. And it is truly a great honor to be on that list with David Goggins and Malcolm Gladwell and many others. The show is also brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8 foot prints on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. They're extremely detailed, so go by wallpilot.com and take a look at some of the ready to print, and we even do custom orders with your name, weapons load, unit, all those good things on a Wall Pilot print for your walls. Order these highly detailed aircraft profiles at wallpilot.com. I mentioned to you last week that I was going to be at the Tailhook Association convention. And what I'd like to do is kind of report on the things that I saw there and the people that I met. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show and talk about Hook 23, alibis up front. This was the first time I've attended Tailhook. As I mentioned before, I was invited by Admiral Bill Gortney to be on a panel of discussion about the Operation Iraqi Freedom campaign, particularly the Shock and Awe campaign, because I was running tankers. And my panel was on Friday afternoon, began about 12:15 or so. And they had all the Air Wing commanders up there and me and a bunch of other folks. And we ran out of time and I didn't get a chance to say some of the things I wanted to. And to tell you the truth, I was being kind of obnoxious. They said, well, we've run out of time, Sluggo, you can contact him, read his book, all that kind of stuff. I grabbed the microphone because I said to myself, I'm not driving 7 hours plus to be on this panel and not say anything. So I went ahead and told the story of air refueling problems that we had. 417,233,000 pounds of gas allow a Ford F-150 truck to make 2,685 round trips to the moon. That's how much we transferred. Talked about some of the problems that we had for bed down and everything, just in about 5 or 6 minutes. And a number of the leaders that were on the front row, we had Admiral Tim Keating, 4-star Admiral Tim Keating, Admiral Bill Gortney, 4-star, Barry Costello, who was the USS Constellation Strike Group commander. He was a 2-star admiral. Vice Admiral Dave Nichols, who was the Deputy Combined Forces Air Component Commander with General Mosley, all sitting there in the front row. A couple of those gentlemen came up to afterwards and said, man, we're so glad that you said the things you did and got those things out. And of course, I had a number of opportunities to tell people while I was walking around who I was, why I was there. It was really an incredible convention. And I got to see a lot of people that I have known for a long time. But the coolest thing about these kinds of conventions, and on Friday, all of the Navy aircrew came in. So there's about 3,000 people in the Nugget Resort Friday night for flight suit night, which was fantastic. But as I mentioned, the great thing about these conventions is they have what's called the industry floor. People from industry, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, Collins Aerospace, associations like the A4 Skyhawk Association, Willie Driscoll, the Rio, that's the ace with Randy Cunningham, had his own booth. All of these different folks had booths there that were just cool to be a part of and walk through and talk to people there. And of course, Lockheed Martin had one of the biggest ones. I want to talk about them for just a moment. Lockheed Martin, Lockmart, had one of the best booths there. And there was a lot of traffic through it because they were showing off some of the weapons that they make. And they had one of the greatest attractions probably of the entire event. They had an F-35 cockpit simulator with a huge screen in front of it that worked. You could actually sit in the cockpit and fly the F-35. Landed on aircraft carrier, landed on a large deck amphibious assault ship. But what was really cool was you could shoot AMRAAM and Sidewinder missiles and drop bombs on things. So, of course, who am I not to hop in this thing and fly it around? The two Lockheed Martin folks that were running this simulator, their call signs were Doyle and Danny. And I walk up to him and I says, yeah, want to hop in? Yeah, sure, I want to sit down. So let me just give you a quick cockpit familiarization of the F-35. You have the throttle in your left hand and the control stick in your right hand. And there are lots of buttons on both of them that run all kinds of things. And it's pretty traditional, running the radar on the throttles, running the acquisition button, all those kinds of things, going from air to air, air to ground, all those different modes. It's all done on the throttles. On the stick, of course, you have the trim, weapons release, but you also have a switch that changed modes on the computers. And the radar, all those different kinds of things on the stick. There's really a lot of buttons. And I remember sitting there in the cockpit thinking, man, there's a lot of switch actions here. There's a lot of things to remember in all these switch actions. But folks, that's the great thing about modern fighters is it's all at your fingertips. It really is. You can run the airplane literally from your fingertips. As most of you know, the F-35 has a flat glass instrument panel. I thought it was very interesting how they had it set up. They had it in 4 quadrants. The farthest left quadrant was what the distributed aperture or the DAS system was seeing, the camera system. And I was shocked to see how far out that thing really can see. And I remember a story from a red flag back a while ago where a F-16 pilot, lieutenant colonel, very experienced, was flying with a mixed group of F-16s and F-35s. The F-35 squadron was from Hill. It was the Rude Rams, the 34th. And this young lieutenant that didn't have a whole lot of experience or flying time in the F-35 told the old head Viper mission commander of this strike package going in, hey boss, threat behind you, low, yada yada. And of course this lieutenant colonel's like, wait, what? Really? You can see this? And the F-35 pilot's going, boss, seriously, there's something back here, okay? I have it on my system. And of course, his sensors picked it up. The distributed aperture system, the camera system locked right onto it. And they saw that there was 2 aggressors that had gotten behind him somehow and were going to attack him. Because the F-35 systems could sense those 2 aggressors behind the strike package, they were able to turn around, pop those 2 guys, kill the bad guys, go on with their mission, and complete their mission. The left-hand quadrant was this DAS camera, and the targets, air-to-air targets, were Su-27 flankers. And I was very surprised at how far that thing could see. I remember the numbers and everything. I'm not going to talk about them here because I figured they're probably unclassified numbers, but I'm just not going to go there. But it was out there, and you could visually tell that these were Russian Su-27 flankers by the paint scheme, by the stars and the tails. Even though this is a simulator, it was detailed enough that you could see what these things were. The next screen over, I'll call it screen number 2, moving from left to right, was this graph, kind of ball graph, that showed the airplane's stealth and low observability. And I didn't understand what it was at first until Doyle explained to me, hey, this is what this is telling. Right now, the airplane's all stealthed up. You don't have the outboard AIM-9X rails. the airplane is operating in its lowest observable form. As I came up on the 4 Su-27s I was going to shoot, of course, the doors open on the bottom of the plane because that's where the AMRAAMs are. And that little graph changed color. And that was to show we are no longer as low observable as we once used to be. And I just thought it was fascinating that they had a panel or a portion of the screen that would show the pilots exactly how low observable they were. And when the doors open, a portion of this sphere that is basically the radar cross-section of the airplane turned yellow, and then as it opened all the way, bright red for just a few moments because the door acts really fast. As many of you may not know, the AMRAAM is actually mounted on a rail on one of the weapons bay doors. And when that door opened, you could see that the airplane was no longer quote unquote low observable or stealthy because that door was opened by this graph. And again, it was like a little ball of different colors, had turned a portion of it yellow and red, meaning the door was open. But as soon as it closed, it went back to being green again. And Doyle actually pointed out to me, he goes, yeah, see, watch, the door just opened. Okay. Do you see the stealth properties of the airplane changed by that display right there? And I went, oh, isn't that fascinating? Okay. I had no idea that was part of the airplane, though, that it actually checks itself to see how stealthy it is and how low observable it is. Quick news update. Apparently, the Department of Defense has been worried about the Russians flying out of Latakia and assaulting our drones flying over Syria with their Su-27s, Su-35s. They've also been worried about the drones that have been watching the Naval Surface Action Group that has been going through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians also physically assaulting our drones over the Northern Arabian Gulf. The 421st Fighter Squadron from Hill Air Force Base, just north of where I live, the Black Widows are deployed over there right now and are flying missions, I guess, to help support our drone operations and kind of shoo all the Russian and Iranian flies away with our new 5th generation low observable stealthy F-35s. I've seen a little bit about in the news. I saw 1 or 2 articles talking about they're deployed because of increased tensions with the Russians assaulting our MQ-9 Reaper you've seen in the news. And of course, the Iranians doing the same over the Northern Arabian Gulf and them watching our ships from their drones. And as the drones send the pictures back, the Iranians have been sending these swarms of small boats out to harass our ships. Well, folks, now there are low observable F-35s over there. And you know, folks, I was kind of curious because I saw an article 2 weeks ago saying the Iranians can see our F-35s with their low power, long range radars. And I thought, really? I wonder who's over there. Well, now we know it's the 421st from Hill, the Black Widows. I just found it fascinating. There was actually part of the display that would show how stealthy the airplane actually is. Okay, so moving left to right, panel number 3 on the instrument panel, again, one big piece of glass, was kind of the overhead God's eye view of the battlefield. And this is where it shows the SAM sites, it shows the Russian Su-27s, that's what they used in the simulator. This particular simulator, Su-27s, and there was like 3 2-ships of them running around that you could go blow away. And then, of course, there was all kinds of surface-to-air missile batteries, like S-300s on the ground that you could go bomb. And that God's eye view really gave you incredible situational awareness. It really did. And I just remember, oh, wait a minute. You know what? This was panel number 4, not panel number 3. I'll get to panel number 3 in just a second. So this God's eye view, you see the terrain, the mountains. It's like a moving map display, but it shows all the real threats. It shows your home base, as a home plate, and of course your wingmen, wherever they happen to be. And you've got Link 16 in the F-35 and other data link systems that they are able to share information with. So you know where all your bros and sisters are on this overhead display. As you got closer to the ground, the detail of the topography became even more pronounced and detailed. It was really amazing. The houses and the buildings and everything were all there. But this God's eye view of where you are, where the bad guys are, where the bad guy SAMs were, was really quite incredible. And once you put the radar cursor over the top of it and mash the button, which put it in the shoot list, it would show up on the DAS, the camera system. And it'd say, okay, this is what you're looking at. This is what it looks like. And you could say that it was an S300. You could see the SAM site overall. You could actually zoom in on different portions of the SAM site, see the tubes, see the radar, all those different kinds of things. So I began chasing these Su-27s. And again, there are so many switches that you have to remember what they all do. And, one zooms the radar out, one zooms the moving map display out, all those different things. It really was a lot of switches for a tanker guy. And I'm sure all these pilots, over and over, they're practicing this stuff and it's just second nature. Like Clouseau says, intuitive expertise in running all this. But the amount of information you had in the cockpit with visually being able to ID everything that the radar and the sensors are looking at and be able to put weapons on them was truly amazing. And the other amazing thing about this is I wasn't wearing the helmet. All of this is presented on their helmet, and their helmet in the F-35, of course, has the night vision system already built into it that they can turn on and off. And of course, all of the weapons, parameters, footprints, everything are all in the helmet. This was all displayed on the instrument panel, the flat piece of glass in front of me. I skipped over one. The third panel is like a map display, a stick map, okay? It has a silhouette of an F-35. It shows your flight path. It still shows targets and all those kinds of things. It's a black background with lots of stick figures. But one of the very interesting things was, Doyle says, hey, you want to go after one of the SAM sites? I said, yeah, sure. He says, okay, so there it is. You see it on the God's eye view. Put the cursor over it, mash the button. Now it's in the shoot list. Okay, now you can share it with your bros and your sisters that are flying other airplanes. What happened was a little ball appeared around the F-35. And that was basically the weapons release footprint that it had in its weapon system. Obviously, for the particular JDAM we were carrying, and I was up pretty high. I was in the 26,000 foot region. The Su-27s I shot were like at 32 or something like that. Now I'm dropping bombs. And so that footprint and that little footprint ball around me showed exactly what my weapons release parameters were. Now, close to the airplane, it was a little bit darker green, which meant if the target that I'm dropping something on is in that little darker green area, then it's truly dead. The weapons are going to smack it every stinking time. The light green, there's some probability to the hits, but for the most part, the weapons are going to go where you want them to go. And of course, as soon as I locked on to that S300 launch tube system, transporter erector launcher, it showed up on the camera system, and there it was, and I could zoom in and zoom out and tell, okay, that's exactly what it is. Once that target was on one of the edges or underneath this little footprint ball, I mashed the button, and the airplane actually dropped the weapon by itself. It figured out all the parameters, and it opened the door, dropped out one of the GBU-38s on top of it. And of course, once it releases, you get a time of flight and all those kinds of things of the bomb and everything, and you see it come down. You see the time of flight of the weapon. And of course, on the camera system, the DAS system, you see it actually hit the target and do its thing. Folks, it was amazing. And this is all unclassified. So you can imagine what the real system can do. Take, for instance, in the Northern Arabian Gulf, trying to hold back all these swarms of these small boats that are all armed with machine guns and people on them, or these drones that the Iranians are flying. The F-35 can go and scan the whole area and scan each boat, put the cursor over the top of it, wait 1 potato, 2 potato, it shows up in the shoot list, shows up on the DAS camera system, shows up on the God's eye view, shows up on the moving map display, shows up on the stick map display, and it's all right there in front of you. And you don't even have to talk to your wingman. You can say, okay, as lead, I got this target and this target. Okay, -2, you take these targets. Okay, -3, you shoot down these F-4 Iranian Phantoms or F-14 Tomcats or whatever it is. And okay, 4, you take the mothership of all the little boat swarms that are out there, all the little go fast boats that are swarming around everything. You take out the mothership. And you don't even have to say anything. It just does it. It's just done. It was truly an amazing thing to see. And like I said, that's the unclassified version. You can only imagine what the classified version of the real airplane must be like when you are doing this. And of course, a lot of people wanted to get in the thing and fly it around. I was in it for probably 10 minutes. I did not land the airplane. I just shot some AMRAAMs and dropped some bombs and then got out because there was a lot of people obviously that wanted to get in it. I've got plenty of flying time in other airplanes, and I've actually flown an earlier version of this back in the 2008-2009 timeframe, and this one is 10 times better. The screen went from about 120 degrees in front of you, 60 degrees either side of center line, off your nose. Pretty tall screen, so you could see everything. It was just really cool to see it, really fun to see it. Lockheed Martin always has the coolest stuff. They really do. Boeing does too, don't get me wrong, but this was something that had a mock-up of the F-35 seat, throttle, the stick, touch screen on the flat panel, all the different things that you needed to do. And as you know, folks, this doesn't have a traditional heads-up display. It's all in the helmet. The helmet-mounted display, which was made by Collins Aerospace, a company I used to work for, is truly amazing. And with the aperture system, what's really cool is you can drop bombs in the real airplane and actually watch through the airplane because of the way the cameras are set up around the F-35. Actually watch the bomb that you drop on a SAM site actually hit the thing. And of course, it records it all. They bring back videotape from all of this, combat operations. And so you can imagine the Northern Arabian Gulf and over Syria right now, they must be collecting terabytes, hundreds of terabytes of information from the F-35s and their sensor systems. Just really cool and really fun to fly. Well, not to be outdone, Boeing had a pretty good size booth there too. And what they had was also fantastic. If you have been reading and watching what's going on with the Super Hornet, you know that the Super Hornets are being upgraded, and the new ones coming off the line also have flat screen instrument panels that you can partition into separate panels to be looking at different things. They had an F-18F 2-seat Super Hornet cockpit mock-up with mock-ups of the ejection seat that you could sit in and do the same thing that you could do in the Lockmart F-35, except for now you're flying a Super Hornet. I did not actually get in the Super Hornet cockpit. I've got a really good picture kind of leaning to the side that you can see the rear cockpit glass and the pilot front seat glass. The gentleman that works with Boeing was somebody that was sitting in it, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. And they're shooting missiles and dropping bombs. The actual heads-up display or the helmet-mounted display symbology was actually on the screen in front of you. So it would show all the air-to-air targets, the air-to-ground targets, all those kinds of things. You could actually land it on a carrier. They actually had a carrier there to show, this is what it would look like when you're coming aboard. This is what it looks like when you're dropping on SAM sites or buildings. This is what it looks like when you're shooting AMRAAMs and Sidewinders. What was really fascinating was Friday night, the resort was filled with naval aviators, and they came in their flight suits. Air crews from Lemoore who fly Super Hornets were taking turns getting in and out. And I stood there kind of off Wizzo's right shoulder for about 10 minutes and watched this Wizzo and his pilot, I can't remember which squadron they're from, it's a West Coast squadron, do their thing. It's a touchscreen panel. And to watch the pilot do his thing, and of course the Wizzo do his thing in the back seat, the weapons system operator truly runs the show from the back seat and tells the pilot what to do. But it was just fascinating watching them touch the different screens, go through the different modes, air-to-air mode, air-to-ground mode, interrogating the Su-27s and the and the MiG-31s and then obviously shooting the missiles and working the targeting pod and looking at things on the ground. It was just really fun to watch these guys do this. The thing that was fascinating, again, was it's all touchscreen. It's a flat panel touchscreen, just like the F-35, watching the air crews do their thing and how fast all of these guys were very competent at their jobs to listen to the conversation back and forth, because obviously they didn't have helmets, they didn't have intercom. And so they would just talk back and forth over the top of the pilot seat. The Wizzo would talk to the pilot in the front seat, hey, do this, or hey, do that, put it in this mode, do this. And it was just fascinating to hear that whole conversation going on between these very highly trained aircrew members and watch the systems actually work by people who know how to make them work. As I said, I didn't sit in the Super Hornet. I wish I had. There was a line to do it, and I just didn't feel like jumping in line and trying it out. But it was so cool watching this. I want to tell you something. When I used to work at Rockwell Collins, they had just come up with a new technology. They were able to make a 3-dimensional flat screen. I'm not going to go into how they figured it out, but I'm just going to tell you that the flat screen technology that they're putting in airplanes now, these fighter jets and bombers and attack airplanes, can truly be 3-dimensional. And in our display library that we had, or museum that we had at Rockwell Collins, we had I think it was about a 26-inch screen TV that Sharp, who makes Rockwell's or Collins Aerospace glass, do one of these 3D flat screens. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to tell you the technology and how we figured it out. I'm just going to tell you it was truly a flat screen. And they ran World of Warcraft on it. They just looped this World of Warcraft thing on it. And it was truly 3-dimensional. And now you have that available, all of these different fighter units. And of course, our displays, folks, well, we don't know what we'll use with the 3D thing. They're talking to this Army guy, and I go, I know exactly what you use this for, sir. Use it for targeting. Use it for, figuring out your coordinates, mensurating your coordinates, figuring out where the targets are, what kind of terrain they're in, all these different things, because you can look at it from, God's eye view, 360 degrees around the compass, all these different things. And this Army colonel was, of course, shaking his head. Yeah, that's exactly what I do with this. I said, think about it, sir. The corner of a building and are going to hit the 3rd floor of a 7-story building. And now you have a flat panel that you can actually touch screen and move things around and actually see it in 3 dimensions. And that kind of cockpit is now available with this flat screen technology. I do not know if the F-35 or the F-18 Super Hornet or the new F-18EX flat screen displays are 3-dimensional. I kind of think they are, but I don't know that for sure. And that's something I'll explore and find out. Boeing had predominantly this F-18 cockpit. Again, they're playing to all the Navy folks because the Tailhook Association is the Navy's civilian association that everybody joins. All right. And I mean, there were guys there. I'll talk about this in a few minutes when I talk about the people that I met. There were some guys there that old and had been around for a very long time and had been members of Tailhook since the 60s when it was created. Back to the F-18 cockpit. So the back seat has both the hand controllers. Obviously, the front seat has the throttles and the center stick and the side consoles with all the different things on it. It was a full-up F-18 F2-seat Super Hornet cockpit, except for it had these flat glass instrument panels that most of the things that you did, turning things on, turning things off, interrogation, running the radar, running the air-to-ground, air-to-air modes, all those things was touchscreen. Truly amazing technology. And of course, the F-18 Super Hornet was just as popular as Lockheed Martin's F-35. There was always people waiting to get in it. And like I said, Friday night, I just stood there watching these air crews go through the motions, running the radar and running the systems and talking back and forth. It was truly an incredible thing to watch and to listen to. The next company I had to spend time in their booth was Collins Aerospace, which used to be Rockwell Collins, who I used to work for. Naturally, I knew they had a booth there. I wanted to go see who I knew. And there was only one person that I knew, Jay Pinkney, who is a business development guy. All the others, I had no idea who they were. Rockwell Collins was bought out by United Technologies, became Collins Aerospace, and United Technologies was then bought by Raytheon. As Jay told me, the only thing that they don't do now is manufacture the airplane and the engines, okay? They literally do everything else. As part of their booth, they had one of the new ejection seats, one of the new like 5th gen, 6th generation ejection seats. And it was really fascinating just to kind of see the technology. They've got this netting that goes out so that your elbows don't go flying back behind you. There's actually like blow up donut that comes around your head that holds it in place. Really some fascinating technology. But they also had an F-35 like cockpit with the same kind of throttle and stick that Lockheed had. As a matter of fact, they were identical. The only difference was it looked like they were like in a Norwegian fjord or something like that. Mountains and snow and all those kinds of things. They had an aircraft carrier on the water, and they were challenging people to go ahead and shoot an approach onto the carrier to see if they could land. And of course, I knew how to do that. When he put me on go, I had to maneuver around. I kind of played around with it for a little bit, but I was able to get myself all lined up and was able to come in and catch a 3-wire. My approach was kind of flat though, okay? The LSOs and the CAG would probably had to talk to me, but it was just fun to do that again and to do it particularly in an F-35. The great thing about the F-35 is when you are in the approach and landing mode, the throttle moves by itself. The throttle maintains the 0.6 AOA all the way down. And of course, the F-35 has what's called JPALS, Joint Precision Approach Landing System, and it brings it literally right to the deck. I left that thing off because, of course, what fun is it letting the computer fly it? But I did let it do the throttles. I asked the guy, I said, well, where's the flap switch? And he goes, oh, that's all automatic. The flaps, when it goes into approach and landing mode, it knows when you're slowing down, when you're on final approach. It knows, when to put the needles, the crosshairs for landing, all those kinds of things. It's all right there. The plane senses all of this. My approach, like I said, was flat, a little fast too. I haven't flown in a long time. It was just really cool. I didn't put the hook down. I just landed on the deck the second time and went around and just started flying the thing around. And I left it in afterburner for a really long time. I remember looking down, I'm going like 556 knots, chasing down, again, 2 Su-27 flankers. Got to fire missiles at both of them and was looking at the camera system, the DAS, and all the things on the ground and everything, just kind of toying around with it. Not quite as detailed as the F-35 simulator in Lockheed Martin's booth, but still pretty detailed. And the screen wasn't near as big either, but it was still just fun to fly it around. And I was doing this at a time period around lunchtime on, I think, Friday, when there just wasn't a lot of folks around. There wasn't a lot of people around, so I got to fly it for quite a while. Talked to my buddy Jay, who I worked with, and actually met somebody very interesting we're going to have on the show, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. Now, Raytheon had a really nice booth too, and the things that they had in their booth was mostly weapons. And the really cool thing about Raytheon and its weapons, they had a mock-up of an AIM-9X, a mock-up of an AMRAAM. They had a mock-up of the small diameter bomb, but they had really cool test video of all the different kinds of weapons that they make for the Navy and the Air Force. Most of the people there that I talked to were program managers on different kinds of weapon systems. It was just fun to kind of sit back and see how these weapons have evolved, particularly like the small diameter bomb Block 1. And of course, now they've got what's called the Stormbreaker small diameter bomb Block 2. And they just had these videos of these things being tested, which was really fun to just sit around and watch. The mock-ups of the weapons were full-scale mock-ups. So you got to see how big these things were, which was really pretty cool. BAE Systems was also there with their booth with all of the different avionics and different systems that they had. One of the really cool things about BAE Systems is they had a mock-up of their towed decoy. Now, what is a towed decoy? These have been around since about 1999, maybe a little earlier. I saw them on the F-16s at Aviano during the Kosovo War. What it is, it looks like a long bullet. It's attached to the airplane through a fiber optic cable, is dispensed from the F-16 from a dispenser on the right wing AIM-9 pylon, and there's two of these bullet-shaped things, each one of the dispensers. It's connected to the F-16's electronic countermeasure systems, is towed behind the airplane with, I think, like a 1,500-foot fiber optic cable. And what it does is it messes with enemy radars. It'll like say, no, here I am. I'm right here. Here I am. Here I am. And I remember a story from the Allied Force campaign. The B-1s had these things on their planes, and they're in the back. They've got a dispenser on both sides, so they actually have 4 of these things. The B-1 over Kosovo was getting lit up by a straight flush radar about to have an SA-6 gainful missile shot at it. And the story goes that the defensive system operator goes, watch this. Towed decoy is sent out. They call it walking the dog, and they actually call the decoy Little Buddy. We're going to deploy Little Buddy. The decoy goes to the end of the 1,500 feet, is being towed behind the airplane, and the missile locks onto the B-1, and apparently they flip on the towed decoy, and that SA-6 missile bends and goes for the decoy behind the B-1. Now, you can imagine the radar cross-section of the B-1 is big, but apparently this little bullet, and it must be only about 2 feet long, maybe 6 inches in diameter. No, maybe about 3 inches in diameter, about a foot long, towed behind the airplane, and it's able to somehow emit a bigger radar cross-section than a B-1, because he said that SA-6 missile locked onto them, and as soon as they turned the towed decoy on, that missile turned and hit the decoy. Dan Hampton, in his book Viper Pilot, talks about how he has the towed decoy behind him. Matter of fact, there's a great story where he's got it behind him in the sandstorm, realizes that he's getting shot at like crazy, and something takes the towed decoy out. These things are vital to our electronic countermeasure against surface-to-air missile systems, air defense systems, radars. Like I said, this little bullet, foot long, maybe 3 inches diameter, hooked to a fiber optic cable, I think it's 1,500 feet behind the airplane, has saved numerous people's lives because of what it does. Little Buddy. Let's put out Little Buddy. Anyway, BAE Systems had a bunch of these different things, electronic countermeasures and boxes in it. It's just fun to see all this stuff, see how far we've come with it also. I spent a lot of time at Martin Baker ejection seats booth. They had a mock-up of the F-35 ejection seat there. And of course, being a model airplane guy, I asked Lance, thank you, Lance, for spending so much time talking to me, if I could take pictures of it, because again, I'm building model airplanes, and better thing for an ejection seat of an F-35 than to have the mock-up full scale right there in front of you. And so I was able to take pictures of it, and I was talking to him. It was fascinating, the video that they were playing of the history of the Martin Baker Company and ejection seats. They were showing tests of different ejection seats in the video. They've saved like 7,600 lives. Lance told me that they just recently found a guy who said, oh yeah, by the way, I ejected with your Mark 10 seat from a BAE Hawk on this date. And that was a new one that they didn't know about. Unfortunately, I think it was Friday evening, a Marine F-18 went down and the pilot did eject but did not survive. And Saturday morning when I saw Lance, he mentioned that to me. I want you to think about this, folks. Martin Baker ejection seats have saved, I think it's 7,600 lives or more. And they had the total up there. It's amazing to watch these things. My Uncle Robert ejected out of an F4 in a Martin Baker ejection seat, took 3 swings in the chute and was on the ground, saved his life. And there's so many other stories that they had in this videotape of the Martin Baker ejection seats saving so many people. And it was just really interesting to watch in slow motion and in real time how they test the ejection seats. Because some of these ejection seats are tested with dummies, all dressed up in the flight gear. The rocket sled is going like 400, 450, 500 miles an hour down these rails, and the seats come out and do all the things they're supposed to do. And the seats aren't going up very high, less than 200 feet, maybe. It was just really fascinating to watch this video and the history from the very first Martin Baker ejection seats, like in the late 40s, early 50s, to the F-35 seat that they have now. Thank you, Lance, for talking to a knuckle dragon tanker guy and explaining to me some of the ins and outs of the ejection seats. We're going to have Lance on the podcast. He's a field service engineer, goes all over working on the ejection seats for the F-35. And I told him about my podcast, and he says, hey, I'd love to come on this and talk about ejection seat history and so forth. So it'll be fun to have Lance on later on down the road. When I first came up the stairs Thursday morning, the first booth I ran into is the new commercial tanker group called Metria. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. They've gone out and bought ex-Singapore Air Force KC-135 R models, so they have boom and they have wingtip drogues. I went up to their booth, introduced myself, hey, my name's Mark Hasara, call sign Sluggo. They're all kind of looking at me kind of quizzically, and then I just happened to say, I'm the author of the book Tanker Pilot. Every one of them just lit up. Oh man, we've read your book. I got to talk to Joe, one of their boom operators who made the very first commercial boom contact. There was another boom there, call sign Donkey. Rick, one of their leaders, was there. Ryan and Trent were also there. They had one of the boom drogue adapters that you put on the KC-135 boom and laid it out there, and they were having people sign it, which was really cool. And I got one of their coins, which I thought was great. But it was so much fun sitting and talking to these commercial KC-135 guys. They fly out of March Air Force Base, March Field, down in Southern California. Of course, they live all over because, they're commercial guys, and that's the way the world is now. It was fascinating listening to how they do their business development and some of the contracts that they have with the Navy, with the Air Force, and of course, with our allied partners. Just a lot of fun talking to them. And like I said, one of their leaders, Rick, was there. Found out he's a cigar smoker. Rush Limbaugh's wife sent me some of his cigars out of his personal humidor. And of course, I've told all of you, I'm LDS. I don't smoke cigars. I don't smoke, period. And it was actually pretty hard for me to find cigar smokers at this convention, but I was able to find a couple of them and was able to hand out some of these cigars that Rush's wife sent to me. And Rick got one of them. And he just beamed. He was a big Rush fan, and I've got a great picture of he and I. He's holding the cigar, and we're just sitting talking. It was so much fun meeting you guys and hearing your story and hearing how your company came about. And I wish all the best to you guys. There was one other commercial air refueling system, and they've been around for a long time, and that's Omega. And their president is Tom Swiderick. Tom and I were captains at Kadena, flying tankers out of the 909th together back in the 90s. And he's now the president of Omega. We had a fascinating discussion, and he is very well connected in the, obviously, air refueling community. We were talking about how there is a current air refueling capability gap. There's not enough tankers. And he was the one who was telling me they want to be able to buy the KC-10s that are going into the boneyard because 20 of them have the wingtip air refueling pods as well as a centerline drogue and a boom. And he told me that they're all being cut up. They're going to be scrapped, which I just can't understand. And I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, in my podcast about air refueling shortfalls, and that gap is getting wider. As two air refueling experts are standing there talking about this, we're just getting madder and madder and madder and madder that these commercial companies can't buy the 135s that are being put in the boneyard and the KC-10s that are being put in the boneyard and are being scrapped. That's just madness to me. Let these commercial companies, whether it be Metria or Omega, let them buy these things. Let them operate them. They've got the capacity to do this. And of course, there are plenty of experts out there, people like me that flew tankers that they could hire to be on their staffs. But the Air Force is saying, no, we're getting rid of these things. And I just don't understand it. So Tom and I had a pretty emotional discussion about what's going on in the air refueling community right now, both militarily and in the commercial realm. We're sitting around two guys, we think we've got the answers, but I don't know who's going to listen to us, if anybody's going to listen to us. My bottom line, folks, after particularly talking to the Indo-Pacific commander, Chris Aquilino, while I was there, sell all the tankers that we're putting into the boneyard to these commercial groups, so at least they can set up the air bridge and free the active duty, guard, and reserve tankers to fight the fight. I understand insurance for a commercial tanker group to put them in theater flying actual combat missions is probably through the roof. That's fine. Let them have these KC-135R models. Let them have these KC-10s so that the commercial air refueling companies can set up the air bridge, move the iron into country, and relieve the active duty tanker units of that task. That's my 2 cents for this. The last booth I want to talk about was a lot of fun. I got to meet Ward Carroll, who has a tremendous YouTube channel. And folks, if you're not a subscriber to Ward Carroll's YouTube channel, please go subscribe to it. He's got 425,000 followers now, and he's got fantastic interviews. Somebody I've followed for a long time on YouTube. I told him who I was, why I was there, showed him my book, and I think I mentioned to you, I brought 2 prints with me. He flew Tomcats. So I rolled out the 4-foot Tomcat print of the VF-31 F-14D that I did for the education fund, and he was actually the first one to see it, and he absolutely loved it. And fortunately, after I did my panel discussion and talked about air refueling during shock and awe, I went straight to his booth, and he had me on his show, interviewed me on his show. Don't know when that interview will come out, probably next week, because he had a couple of 2-star and 3-star admirals that came by that he'd known for a long time and interviewed. Ward Carroll has some really, really outstanding YouTube posts where he talks about everything from the Chinese balloon, interviews Tomcat drivers, interviewed Casey Campbell, the gal in the A-10 that had the surface air missile go off between her tails and the engine of her A-10. Just a lot of really cool guests. And he posts, a couple times a week. He wants one of my wall pilot F-14 graphics behind his camera on his wall, which we're getting ready to do. He flew a VF-102 and was the skipper of that squadron. And we are preparing an F-14B for him. It was great meeting Ward Carroll, talking to him. And during my interview, I learned a lot from him. And folks, I made some mistakes while I was interviewing with him because he kept asking me, no, I mean this. No, I mean this. I'll be honest with you. At first, I didn't understand what he's trying to do. His channel has a vast number of people on it. And I was speaking about people and acronyms lay people didn't understand. And that was a mistake I made. I asked him afterward, I said, so help me understand where I was going wrong. Help me be better at what I do. And he was very honest with me. He says, no, it was a good interview. You had a lot of great information. You're very passionate about this. People don't know these people and they don't know these acronyms, and you got to be really careful about using the military lingo. And that's something that I take back. Truly a master at interviews, Ward Carroll. So please go to Ward Carroll's YouTube channel and subscribe and go listen and watch some of the posts that he's made because they're really good and they're really in depth on a lot of information on current events that are going on around the world. Ward and his wife, Carrie, were both there, had their setup right there that, we just sat down on bar stools and talked. Just a lot of fun. And again, I learned a lot from the interview with him. And Ward, if you're listening to this, thank you for educating on better ways to interview people and to talk to people on my channel. I'm going to spend some time talking about the people that I met there. One particular person, he needs to go first, my good friend Moose Lakaitis. Moose was the Deputy Carrier Air Wing Commander on the Roosevelt Air Wing 8 during shock and awe. He and I met when he was the Combat Ops Deputy Commander on the floor of the KAOC during Operation Anaconda. We bonded very well during that, and we remain good friends. Moose, it was so good to see you again and to renew our acquaintance and actually see each other eye to eye instead of texting each other. I did his F-18 from the War Party 400 as a 4-foot wall pilot print for the education fund to auction off. people were spending 5 and 6 minutes looking at these things. They were taped to a wall. The profiles of these airplanes that Scott and Sean and Igor and I draw are very detailed. 4 Prowler guys stopped for about 5 minutes and were pointing at the stenciling on the bombs and the missiles and the panel detail and the colors and everything. It was kind of rewarding watching this. But that was Moose's jet, War Party 400, this F-18C. And of course, I brought that intentionally because it had his name on it. Moose is now working for Lockheed Martin and doing great things there. I want to say congratulations to my good friend, retired Captain Stephen Moose Lakaitis, on winning an industry award, leadership award from the Tailhook Association. Well-deserved. Went to a great person and someone I call a great friend. Now, on Thursday, they had a senior leader. These people that were on this panel were all young junior officers during the Shock and Awe campaign that are now Air Wing commanders themselves. And it was really fascinating to listen to how the Shock and Awe campaign and being in this intense air campaign early in their careers helped shape them as leaders. And there's one thing that almost all of them said. There was probably 12 or 14 people up there, all of these Air Wing commanders that worked for some of these admirals that were also on the panel said the same thing. And that was, I was so fortunate that early in my career, I got to work for guys that are on the other side of the podium here that became 3- and 4-star admirals and were guys that I looked up to and wanted to emulate and become like. I don't think there's any better words that someone could say to you as a leader than to have some of these junior people that are now in leadership positions themselves say to you, boss, you helped set the foundation of my career because when I was working for you, I wanted to be a leader just like you, and I wanted to emulate you. And on the other side of the table, Vice Admiral Dave Nichols, retired, who was the Deputy Combined Forces Air Component Commander. He was the number 2 in command of the air campaign over Baghdad, Shock and Awe campaign in March and April of 2003. A fantastic commander. And it was fun to get reacquainted with Admiral Nichols. Matter of fact, I sent him a copy of my book. During that time period where we'd be just kind of sitting talking, he would tell me some of these background stories of things that were going on while we were trying to solidify air tasking order and all of the bed down for the air campaign, particularly for tankers. And I learned some things from him that I didn't know, like how many times he went back and forth trying to get bases open to us in countries that said, no, we're not doing it. And then finally, the Egyptians allowing Moose's Carrier Air Wing 8 and Cyrus's, I believe, Air Wing 3 fly over the Sinai around the corner and into Iraq and fly those missions. Long missions, 960 miles one way, 1,920 miles, I think it was like 7 hours. Moose and Cyrus told me. I also got to meet Mark Cyrus Vance, a retired 2-star admiral, and one of the chapters in my book is named after him. We had talked to each other on the phone. We had emailed each other back and forth. This is the first time that we've been able to shake hands and talk personally. Another great, great commander, because guys that were in his air wing and people that worked for him when he was at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center at Fallon, of course, coming up to him, telling him what a great boss he was. And it was just fun to ask him about some of the missions he was flying as day carrier and providing close air support for the troops on the ground in northern Iraq, flying these long missions across the Sinai. The great praise he had for the RAF VC-10 guys who helped drag his big package of 4 F-14s, 20 Hornets, and 2 EA-6Bs back to the Sinai Peninsula, where his S-3s hooked up with them and took them the rest of the way back to the Truman. The chapter in my book is named after him for a reason, because, again, we had wonderful leadership. The Shock and Awe campaign, the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I can't think of a time other than when I was at Kadena where I was surrounded with such fantastic leadership. Dave Nickel, Bill Gortney, Cyrus Vance, Muslakaitis were all these guys. I got to meet one of my childhood heroes while I was at Tailhook this past weekend. I knew his story. Everybody knows his story, but he was there. He is now a professional speaker, has a book out. I remember reading about him when I was in high school, a couple years after the Vietnam War had ceased combat operations, and he had his own booth there with his wife. And that is Captain Willie Driscoll. Willie Driscoll was the radar intercept officer, backseater of Randy Cunningham, and he and Willie shot down 5 MiGs to be the Navy's Vietnam aces. Also were awarded the Navy Cross for their last mission in the CAG jet, the Air Wing Commander jet called Showtime 100. And Willie flew with VF-96, flew F-4Js. And on one of their missions, they actually dropped bombs on the Hai Duong warehouse, come off, and there's MiGs everywhere, and they end up shooting down I think it's 3 MiG-17s in one mission. They get hit by a surface-to-air missile on the way out. Duke Cunningham does some funky roll with the airplane to get out over the ocean. They punch out over the ocean and get picked up, get put back on the Constellation. But I got to meet him there. And of course, I've got his card. And he handed me a second, which I thought was really funny. He's a member of some club. They're called the Combat Skiers Group. He's one of these go fast, downhill, as fast as you can type of snow skiers. And he has a card for that. All right. And I think he called himself Grand Kamikaze of the Combat Snow Skiers Group. It was just funny to see this card. Truly a humble man, a lot of experience, now speaking professionally to lots of groups. And of course, he has the distinction of being a MiG ace and one of my childhood heroes. It was fun to tell him that to his face, shake his hand, and just sit and talk with him for a while. They also had a senior leadership panel discussion. And this is current 3- and 4-star admirals that were skippers of, or commanders of F-14, F-18 units during the 2002-2003 timeframe. One of those admirals was 4-star Admiral Chris Aquilino, call sign Lung. He is the Indo-Pacific commander right now. I met him in April of 2002 when he was the commander of VF-11 Red Rippers and F-14B Squadron in Carrier Air Wing 7 on board the USS John F. Kennedy. When then Captain Bill Gortney, now retired 4-star Admiral Shortney Gortney, was the Air Wing commander. Folks, he's in a very interesting area of responsibility right now. He's got China and North Korea. And it was fascinating talking to him a little bit one-on-one, but listening to him talk about current events in his area of responsibility, the Indo-Pacific, China, India, Australia, North Korea, all of those places, Philippines, all fall under his. And he came right out and said it on the panel. China is our number one enemy. And he went through a lot of reasons for that. One of those reasons is China is developing their military to fight and beat the United States military in any way that they can. Let me say that again, in any way that they can. I've told you before, go read the book Unlimited Warfare by those 2 Chinese Air Force colonels. That is kind of their Bible right now to go to war against the United States. There are illegal Chinese aliens crossing our border to the south right now. Our border patrol is capturing Chinese people coming across our border. And where are they going and what are they doing? And he talked about that. He says, you have to understand they are a win at any cost type of, they are developing ships, missiles, aircraft to fight our carrier battle groups. And he's also one of those people who talked about a recent exercise that they had in the Indo-Pacific theater that shows and proves there is an air refueling gap. Think about the vastness of the Pacific Ocean in the Far East. From the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea to the Sea of Japan Japan to the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it's just miles and miles and miles and miles, hundreds of thousands, millions of miles of ocean. I've been there. I was stationed at Kadena for 5 years. I know what it's like flying in this area. I believe that we do not have enough tankers to fight a war in the Indo-Pacific theater, particularly if we had to support a defensive plan in Taiwan. The Chinese are trying to steal all of our technology. The Chinese are, if you go and make any contracts with them, they say, you have to give us our intellectual property. I mean, they want everything and they want to crush us. It was very apparent as I was listening to not only Admiral Aquilino, but others on this panel. Vice Admiral Weitzel, who is the air boss for all naval aviation, spoke that they are having a very, very difficult time recruiting people into the military, particularly pilots. Now that the commercial aviation is so short of pilots, a lot of their pilots in the Navy and in the Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, even in the Army, are leaving the military because within 6 years, they could be making a couple $100,000 flying commercial airlines. And the air boss, Vice Admiral Weitzel, said, we can't compete with that. And he also talked about the political climate in the United States and how people do not want to sign up for the military right now. There was another admiral that was on this panel. Oh, I wish I could remember his name. I can picture his face, can't remember his name. Where he talked about how industry is helping the warfighter, but that industry needs to step up and do a lot more, because a lot of these folks in industry are more concerned about their bottom line and stock prices than they are about supporting the warfighter. Numerous times they have come to industry and said, here is a problem that we have that we need an industry fix for, and it's taking way too long to get that fix in. We should be able to say we need this new capability and have it in 6 months, not 6 years, and have to go through all of the operational testing, all the different things that you have to go through, contracts. He said it's such a headache when we need something right now to fill a capability gap, particularly in a really hot area, and it's taking too long to get that capability gap filled. There's another admiral I met, retired admiral that I met while at Tailhook. He and I corresponded a year or two after the first Gulf War, when I was developing a paper and some other things on what happened during that war. And I finally got to meet him face to face. And that was Rear Admiral Mark Fox. Call sign Mert. His call sign is actually 3 letters, MRT. He just goes by Mert. During the opening day of Desert Storm, Mert and one of his VFA-81 wingmen, Mongo Mongilio, shot down 2 MiG-21s. And it was fascinating to hear the story from him. And I asked him the question, what were you thinking about on the way home? And he told me about some of his doubts. And I'm going to wait until we have him on. He said he's going to be gone for a little while with his family. And in October, I'm going to reach out to him and have him on. And it's a fascinating story about what was going through his head as he was returning back to the USS Saratoga. And I'll ask him that question. What was really cool was hearing from him how he shot the MiG down, how he fired 2 missiles and all the things he had to do, and then drop bombs and then turn back to the carrier, and other missions that he had to fly during Operation Desert Storm. And again, he's just a young junior officer at the time. And then he is the Constellation Air Wing commander during the Shock and Awe campaign. And he told the story of having to launch EA-6Bs to support the F-117 strike on Dora Farms, and then having that stupid sandstorm come through, troops in trouble on the ground, and they had to fly a strike mission to support them when they were going to shut down air operations. And he told me, he says, I was within moments of shutting down air operations on my aircraft carrier when we got word there were an Army Special Forces group, I think, that were in contact with the enemy and needed help right now. And he went to one of his leaders in one of his F-18 squadrons Mark Hubbard, call sign Mother, who I'm also going to have on. And they flew the mission in the sandstorm. So I got to meet Mark Fox, and Mother was also there. And I'm going to have him on also. Mother has the distinction of being an F-18 Hornet pilot. He now flies for ATAC, the commercial adversary group, meaning they're the bad guys. They fly as bad guys. They fly Mirage F-1s and Kafirs in bad guy paint schemes, enemy paint schemes, emulating enemy tactics. But Mother also has the distinction of being a pilot in the commemorative Air Force. Used to fly the Hellcats. That's when I saw him last at the Reno Air Races, and now flies a Corsair. And he had a fascinating picture of his canopy open in his Corsair with an F-35 on his wing at an air show. And Mother has this handlebar mustache that must be a good 6 inches across. But another great naval aviator that I'm going to have on the show later on. And he's going to talk about flying in that stupid sandstorm when these Army guys really needed their help. Flying with ATAC and aggressors, emulating enemy tactics, and flying the Corsair. Now, there's one other person that I met that I want to mention. And this kind of just happened. I was standing in the Collins Aerospace, and Jay Pinkney introduced me to a gentleman, and he said, oh, yeah, I flew during shock and awe also. And I said, oh, you're a 135 guy, because he said he was at LUD. He says, no, I flew Vipers. I was with the 22nd Stingers flying Block 50s. And I turned to him and I said, what was dropping the new CBU-105 sensor-fused weapon like? And his face just lit up. He says, that's the bomb that has to have the 7 successions of miracles, but it is one of the most potent things that I've ever dropped off my airplane. And we went on to talking about some of his missions during the shock and awe campaign. And he stayed there for a little while afterward and flew some follow-on missions after shock and awe went into Iraqi Freedom and the restoration, the buildup of the country again. And those were fascinating too. But he talked also about flying in this sandstorm. And his name is Travis Rule, call sign Possum. I told him, I says, I want your top 4 lessons learned and the stories behind them. And he goes, oh man, I have so many more than that. It was a pleasure to meet him. And we stood there for probably about, a good 20 minutes. And I listened to him about some of these tough missions that he had to fly, supporting missions going into Baghdad, shooting harms, dropping CBU 105s, going from harm shooters to close air support, having also to hold the MiGs back because we sent all the F-15Cs home because we needed the extra gas. And he talked about how that all came about, how they planned for it. Some really cool stories from Possum on flying the Viper during the shock and awe campaign. And again, he was flying out of Spangdahlem with the 22nd Fighter Squadron, Harm Shooter Squadron that was based at Al-Udeid. There are so many other people that I met when I was there. Ran into one of my students at the Joint Forces Staff College who's now out working for a mortgage company, Biscuit. He was there. Ran into some other folks that I worked with in the CAOC during the shock and awe campaign. And I'm not going to go through all of their names right now. It was just fun to be there. I'm a joint warfighter. Seeing all of these people again and having people come up to me, oh, you're Sluggo, the tanker guy. You're the tanker king during OIF. I remember working with you. Remember working this issue and remember working this issue and this strike and all these things and providing gas for that with all of these Navy buds. It was just fun to be there. I've worked with so many Navy people. I've got a lot of Navy friends, and it was truly an honor to go and be a participant on the panel. But the real reason I wanted to go was because I wanted to see a lot of these people I haven't seen for a very long time, shake their hand, talk to them, hand out a book or two, hand out a few cigars, and just be there amongst all of my Navy bros and sisters. I am a joint warfighter. I am a designated joint specialty officer by virtue of being an instructor at the Joint Forces Staff College, and I will always be a joint warfighter. And those of you that are out there currently on active duty in the Guard and Reserve, I admonish you to become joint warfighters. Not only understand Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy does their business, but the tools that they have available to them that will help you do your job better in a joint fight. I forgot one story. In my book, I talk about what it was like conning, steering, driving the USS John F. Kennedy while it was underway replenishing, taking on fuel, food, weapons, next to the USS Seattle. Somehow, Moose introduced me to many of his friends, one in particular. The second day of Hook, I was telling this story, and Moose said, hey, you need to go talk to this person because I think you two have a history and you don't know. And he works for Lockheed, which Moose Lookaitis works for. He introduced me to Jim Gigliotti, call sign Gigs. Moose said, hey, you need to talk to each other about this incident. Moose told me, he says, Sluggo, I think Gigs was the captain of the Seattle when you were on the John F. Kennedy conning the ship when they were underway replenishing from the Seattle. You might want to go ask Gigs about that. I walked up Jim Gigliotti, Gigs, and I said, Gigs, were you the captain of the Seattle when the John F. Kennedy was underway replenishing and an Air Force lieutenant colonel was steering the ship? And he looks at my name and he looks at me and he goes, you're that Sluggo? And I said, Gigs, I am that Sluggo. I am the guy who was conning JFK while you were steering the Seattle next to us. And the lines were going across. We're getting ready to hook up fuel lines. And we just started laughing together. In the book, I call him Iggy. My memory is kind of shot because of what happened in 2009, 2010. His actual call sign is Gigs. He was a Hornet pilot and then went a completely different direction in being captains and steering ships and doing the logistics thing. We had a great time talking to each other, and he told me his side of the story, which was really funny. He says he hears over the Air Force is conning the ship, and he says he literally goes to the window. One of his people has a pair of binoculars and says, sir, there is an Air Force lieutenant colonel sitting in the aux con all mic'd up. And he's laughing and all of his people are like, wait, what? He goes on to talk about, it's just about formation flying, movement and everything. He says there was no reason for you to be scared or anything like that. And I said, once I got the hang of it and Harv Henderson was teaching me what to do, Gigs, it was actually pretty easy. But I'll tell you, Gigs, it's one of the events of my career as a tanker pilot I will never forget. And it's such a great pleasure to finally meet you face to face, Gigs, and to tell you my side of the story and to hear your side of the story. Jim Gigliotti, captain of the USS Seattle, underway replenishing with the USF John F. Kennedy and a Coast Guard cutter on the other side of the Seattle, taking on millions of pounds of gas and lettuce and bombs. And I got to meet him eye to eye for the very first time, shake his hand, and we became good friends. And he will also be a guest on the show at a later date. Oh, nuts. I forgot something else. Folks, they have a luncheon on Saturday. It's called the Ramage Luncheon or something like that, named after a famous Navy pilot. And they do this audience participation thing that was just incredible. Okay. So Admiral Gortney and Admiral Keating got up at the front of the stage right before they were handing out awards to tailhookers and pilots and different aircrew members and industry. That was really, really fascinating. And what Admiral Gortney and Admiral Keating did was they asked, okay, let's find out who in the audience has the most arrested landings, the most traps. And they said, every person in the room that has 1,000 traps, stand up. 1,000 or more traps, stand up. And of course, a whole bunch of people did. There must have been about 25, 30 people that stood up, which is a lot. Okay, think about that. 30,000 arrested landings amongst this group. Then they said, okay, who's got 1,100? And some sat down. Who's got 1,150? Who's got 1,200? Who's got 1,250? They got to 1,550 and one person was standing. A Vietnam vet who had flown through the Vietnam War, Desert Storm, and had 1,500 and I think 46 arrested landings. That's an amazing number of arrested landings. Amazing number. Next thing they did, they said, okay, who is the youngest tail hooker in the audience? Who's the youngest person who has the most recent arrested landing? And of course, they had a bunch of people stand up and then they went by dates. And then there was like this one ensign left. And then they did who's the oldest tail hooker. And they went back to the Vietnam War. They went back to the Korean War. All the Vietnam War guys sat down. And then they asked, do we have in the audience someone who got their first trap in the 1940s during World War II? One guy stood up. He was 101 years old and had his first trap when he was a young ensign in, I think he said, March of 1944. He flew through World War II, the end of World War II, 1944, 1945. He was 101 years old. The oldest tailhooker from the Korean War was 96 years old. And he got his first trap, I think it was in 1952. Then they asked, okay, who in the room has arrested landings on the old straight decks, not the angled decks like the new aircraft carriers? And believe it or not, there was 4 people that stood up. And so they went back and tried to find, okay, how long ago was your arrested landing? Guy that remained standing, 1952 during the Korean War, combat traps on I think the Essex or something like that, straight deck aircraft carrier. Essex from World War II that flew during the Korean War. And he was also in his 90s, if I remember right. Early 90s. This was amazing to watch. And of course, Admiral Gortney and Admiral Keating go to every one of these people and shake their hand and congratulate them. But this one guy in a wheelchair, 101 years old, first arrested landing March of 1944 when he was going through Navy pilot training and then flew, I think he said, Hellcats and Corsairs through the end of World War II and then flew Corsairs in the Korean War and also flew at the very beginning of the Vietnam War. Imagine the stories this guy could tell. The guy that landed on the straight deck, same thing. 1,546 arrested landings from this one guy that flew in the Vietnam War all the way through the Desert Storm War too. So the whole room had a lot of these kinds of people in it. Now, they also have a lot of reunions during this time period when they have Tailhook. VF-111 Sundowners had their reunion. VF-92 from the Vietnam War had their reunion during this time period. I got to meet Kurt Dozay, who got a MiG kill in the sister squadron of Randy Cunningham and Willie Driscoll, VF-92. Man, he's a tall dude. Tall guy. He's about 6'6", 6'7". But he had on his party flight suit, VF-92. So it was really cool to meet him and shake his hand while I was there. From a long ways off, I saw these guys stand up and they had the spade and the yellow flight suits, and I saw his name and had to go up and introduce myself to this big killer. It was just fascinating during this luncheon to see these people stand up and be recognized. 101 years old, World War II Navy pilot that had his first arrested landing on an aircraft carrier in March of 1944. This is the kind of thing that happens when you go to these conventions. If I'm not mistaken, folks, anyone can become a member of the Tailhook Association now. Because I went and asked, Colonel Fred Izatseta wanted to come to the Tailhook convention. And so I asked the membership folks, hey, this Iranian F-4 pilot would really like to become a member of Tailhook. And they said, bring him on. Okay. It's $45 for a year membership. And like I said, to attend Tailhook, it was $70 to go to the convention and like $35 for dinner, the mixer, and the luncheon. I don't know how much the golf tournament was because I don't golf, but I would encourage all of you, go to Tailhook Association. And if you're interested in naval aviation and attending one of these conventions, go sign up to be a member. It's only $45 a year. They have 2-year, 3-year, and even life memberships if you want to sign up for that too. Please go take a look at this group of professionals and naval aviators and become a member. You also get their magazine, the Tailhook magazine, for becoming a member, delivered right to your house. And there's a lot of really great articles, and you get to see what's going on around the fleet from the different squadrons and different units, which is really pretty cool too. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this 69th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show as I kind of report back to you on what happened at Tailhook 23 in Sparks, Nevada. I had a ball there, folks. I didn't sleep at night, folks, because I was so excited through the night to get up early, to go back to the Nugget Resort, to see all these people in the booths, to learn about all the new technology, to meet people that I've interacted with again, meet people that I interacted with with for the very first time and just have a ball being around all of these naval aviators, particularly Friday night, flight suit night, all of these current naval aviators that are flying Hornets and Growlers and E-2 Hawkeyes and all these different airplanes were all there, and I got to meet them. Being on the industry floor was fantastic, seeing all the new technology, meeting a lot of these people for the very first time in the Tailhook Association was fantastic. They invited me back, of course, next year. They've all said, please don't make this your one and only hook event in your lifetime. The two prints that I brought with me, 4-footer of an F-14D and a 4-footer of Moose's F-18 War Party 400, I gave to the education fund to auction off. They actually kept them. Tailhook has their corporate headquarters in San Diego, and from what I understand, Roger Welch told me they are going to peel those off and put them in their entryway. So those of you in Southern California, please go by the Tailhook Association offices, become a member for a year or a lifetime. It's only $45 a year. To go to this convention was really inexpensive. It was $70 to go to the whole convention. There were a couple events you had to pay for, and they were only like $35 or $45 each. So they're going to have it at a different resort next year because they've grown out of the Nugget. I think it's called the Sierra Resort, if I'm not mistaken, is where they're going to have it next year. Thanks to all of you that invited me to come out there. Moose and Shortney, I cannot thank you enough for having me on that panel, allowing me to bring books and two of my art prints. It was great to see the senior leaders that I worked with once again and shake hands with them and renew those acquaintances. Folks, this episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show has been brought to you by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all 4 formats on Amazon, hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. The softback version has the pictures in black and white. The Kindle and Audible versions have the pictures as an extra file you download. And I'm just warning you that the softback pictures are in black and white. You want the color pictures. This episode is also brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8 foot detailed aircraft profiles, right and left profiles. Famous airplanes from World War II all the way up to 5th generation fighters that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. We also do custom aviation work. If you want your name, a tail number, a particular unit, particular weapons load on an airplane that you love, then go to wallpilot.com and send us the little form that tells us, here's what I want. The ready to print, there's 132, I think, ready to print, and they range in price from $100 to $160 for 4, 6, and 8 footers. Custom work is 4-footer for $300, 6-footer for $400, 8-footer for $500. But if you buy an 8-footer, folks, you can read the stenciling on the Sidewinder missiles. They're that detailed. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show can be found on my website at markhasara.com under the podcast pull-down box. Please go download episodes, listen to them, subscribe to the podcast. Thank you for listening and downloading. We've gone over 20,000 downloads in 69 episodes. Now we're climbing because I've talked about it at Tailhook. I'll be at the Airlift Tanker Association convention in Grapevine, Texas in the 9th through the 12th of November. Thanks, folks. Talk to you again next week.